Hey guys, so I am here with a Lightroom tutorial, editing tutorial, and because I know many of you have trouble editing or may just be struggling to find your style or just are new to Lightroom and want to learn more. So I'm gonna do a couple of like challenging photos that aren't necessarily your ideal bright and airy beautiful outdoor setting type of photos. We're going to do a couple interior photos, indoor photos, and with tricky lighting. And I'm going to show you how I would edit them um, without using presets. So, as I've mentioned in some of my past tutorials, I use presets. But what I always recommend to any of my photography students or people that I'm mentoring is learn how to use Lightroom before you invest in presets because, first of all, presets are expensive. And many times, starting out with your business, you don't have a lot of extra cash, but it forces you to understand how to use Lightroom. And there's so many different settings and so many different options and so many different pieces to it that not using presets, you'll get to learn all of them. So we're going to go ahead and use this image here. This is from a baby shower shoot that I did, and it was indoors. It was in like one of those apartment community rooms. So of course the lighting was just all over the place. There was natural light, but it was also heavily lit by some fluorescent lighting and all kinds of LED lighting. It was just crazy. So, and I did use flash. So sometimes flash helps kill the color cast that you're going to get, but we're going to go ahead and just work with this image here and see what we can come up with. So this was taken with my 50mm lens at 2.5, ISO 320, and 1/100th of a second. And this is what the resulting exposure was. So we've got nice shallow depth of field with the 2.5 f-stop. But it is underexposed, so what I would immediately start with is bumping up the exposure, just to give us an idea of what it's looking like. But immediately you can tell it's very yellow, very warm. That lighting is just, it's pretty awful. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the before and after view so we can just see how it's looking. Actually, it's kind of hard to see what I'm doing, so I'm going to switch back out of that. So now we're going to go to our white balance. And before I try anything, sometimes the best thing to do is go to auto. And sometimes it does a good job, sometimes it doesn't. This actually isn't too bad. So we see our white start to get white. And you can see that if you look at, comparing it to the white on the screen here. But it does look a little sort of too cool in my opinion, so I'm going to bring that up just a bit. And I do like it a little brighter and whiter now that we have our yellows sort of under control, so I'm going to bring up the exposure even more. And I'm going to bring up the shadows a little bit, and I'm definitely going to increase the contrast, give it a nice pop here. That already is looking really great. So before and after, pretty good. And I'm going to bring these blacks, I think I'm going to leave the blacks actually where they're at. Whites, sometimes just grabbing these and sliding them to see what they do is great. Let's see. Now, sometimes to give like a film emulation look, you can warm up your highlights and cool your shadows. So sometimes I'll bring over, so this is your split toning here, where it takes, where you can add different color tones to your highlights and your shadows. So we're gonna bring that up a little bit, and we're just gonna add just a titch there. And with the shadows, we're gonna cool down our shadows probably in this range. And somewhere around there. And let me just see how that looks. So if you use this little button here, you turn it off and on. And it's looking a little magenta, so I'm going to bring down my magenta here. And now I'll go back to split tone, see how we're looking. Yeah, that's looking pretty close to what I would do, what I would be pretty much done with. I don't need to do anything to the sharpening, no noise reduction because I was shooting at 300, so it's not overly grainy. We don't have really any chromatic aberration happening, so don't need to really deal with that. One thing I am going to do though is I'm going to correct my profile. And that does sometimes lighten your image. So what happens when you shoot is your lens has a natural vignette, which is like a darker outline around the edge of your image. And it also corrects any distortion. So you'll see that difference there. Some people actually like to have a darker edge. I generally turn that on. And that's pretty much all I would do with that image. So let me pick another image for you guys that would be good to edit. Let's do this one here. So this is the cake at the baby shower. It was so adorable. The little woodland animals, so cute. And this cake was a super talented cake maker. I should have figured out who it was, but it was beautiful. So again, I'm going to start with exposure just to give me an idea of like what sort of color tones we're looking at. Again, it's very yellow, so I'm going to go ahead and just do the auto correct, and that really takes that yellow right out. So, but it is a little bit cool, so I'm going to bring it up just a little bit more. I'm going to add some contrast here, increase my shadows, and leave my blacks where they are. One thing I am going to do that's kind of driving me crazy is correct the, there we go. It was a little crooked, so that was driving me a little bit crazy. One thing that I am noticing is it does seem a little almost magenta maybe. Like you can, if you zoom into your whites and you start to play with your tint, and it's all very like small changes that honestly, if you're doing this for professional work, like your clients probably won't notice at all. But it's just things that photographers really will hone in on. And, you know, you could ask somebody and say, okay, what do you like? Do you like it better this or that? And you make the change and they don't even see the difference. So I'm going to go ahead and actually just increase this even more because I do generally edit pretty light and bright. And that is looking pretty good. One way to take out a lot of the yellow in your photograph, if you still feel like it's a little yellow, maybe the cake isn't quite yellow, maybe it's a little whiter. If you go down to your HSL and your color and you go to saturation, one thing that's really cool is you can click this little button here. And if you go to your image and click and drag down, it's going to actually pull the saturation out of whatever area that you're holding on. So like it was pulling out the yellows and a little bit of orange. Like if I went to this area and pulled down, it's going to pull out the saturation out of the orange, but I don't want to do that. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo. But I kind of like pulling out a little bit of the yellow out of that cake there. So that's a good trick. And that's probably all I would do with this image. That's the best we're going to get with this situation of lighting. And let me see if I can do one more. Let's see if there's like another area. Let's see. All right, so here is a portrait image in that same sort of lighting. And I can show you what I would do to this image. And so let's start with the auto, see what that does. That does pull out, you'll see immediately it does pull out some of that yellowness. And actually that's looking a lot better already. But I do think we need to warm it up a little bit because of their skin tone. So before and after, so pulled out some of the magenta, but I do think her skin is a little bit warmer, so we're going to bring that in. Check her skin. Go. All right, so it's very subtle changes between the before and after. This one definitely had a little bit more magenta that I think was causing some wonky colors. But let's go ahead and increase the exposure. And honestly, like what's going to happen here is we're going to get blown out highlights in their face. So we're going to drop the highlights, but not too much because then you sort of lose contrast. So we're just going to kind of do a nice fine balance between exposure increasing, and I'm going to keep the color, but I'm going to increase the contrast. And it's looking pretty good. For some reason, I feel like their skin might be a little too warm. So I'm going to bring down the yellows, the warmth in the image. Yeah, that's looking a little better. Okay, so now what I think I would end up doing is seeing if pulling out the yellow saturation will do any help to the image. And sometimes you try something and it doesn't necessarily work. You try it again, try something different, and sometimes it will work. So I'm going to go ahead and play with the yellows here. And, you know, I'm not really seeing any benefit by bringing down the yellows, so I'm just going to leave that there. And this is the before and after. And we do see some pop, some increase in contrast. We get the better white balance, and that's pretty much it. So that was it for tough lighting situations, and hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you have questions.